The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am reviewing the gold multi-class cards in this secret name, the first Mythos pack, in the Circle Undone cycle. I reviewed the other player cards in this Mythos pack separately, so make sure you check out those reviews when you have a chance. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. The gold multi-class cards are brand new, so let's get started. Some of the player cards in the Secret Name Mythos pack are multi-class cards that belong to more than one class. A multi-class card is a card that belongs to each of those classes and is not neutral. A multi-class card can be included in an investigator's deck if that investigator has access to either of that card's classes. Unfortunately, there has been some confusion about how the multi-class cards interact with certain investigators' deck building restrictions. FFG's preview article for the secret name suggested if an investigator had limited access to one of these classes on a multi-class card, that card would occupy one of the investigator's limited slots. For example, according to the preview article, Tennessee Sour Mash would count against Ashcan Pete's 5 other class slots since it's both a survivor and rogue card. However, the rules appear to have changed since the preview article was published. According to the secret name's insert, if an investigator has limited access to one of the classes on a multi-class card and unlimited access to one of the other classes on that card, it will still occupy one of the investigator's limited slots unless their deck building options contain the word other in it. That means multi-class cards do not count against the Dunwich Legacy investigator's other class card slots as long as they have unlimited access to one of the classes on the card. That means Ashcan Pete can include Tennessee Sour Mash in his deck without occupying one of his other class slots, while Zoe Samras and Jenny Barnes may include the 45 Thompson in their decks without losing an other class slot as well. Now that we understand the rules for multi-class cards, let's take a look at the cards themselves. The first multi-class card in the pack is the 45 Thompson. It's a Guardian and Rogue asset that costs 6 resources. It has a combat skill icon and the item, weapon, firearm, and illicit traits. It enters play with 5 ammo. You may take an action and spend 1 ammo to fight. You get +2 combat skill value and deal +1 damage for this attack. The 45 Thompson takes up 2 hand slots. Now, if you judge the 45 Thompson based solely on its traits, the size of its magazine, and its combat and damage bonuses, it would rank among the best level 0 weapons in the game. It's so good that it would likely be the first choice of every Guardian and Rogue investigator who could play it. However, the 45 Thompson has 2 attributes that knock it down a peg or two. First, it costs 6 resources, which makes it one of the most expensive firearms in the game. It costs more than a bunch of amazing weapons, including the flamethrower from Shattered Aeons, the M1918 bar from the City of Archives, and the shotgun from the core set. Only the lightning gun from Lost in Time and Space costs as much as the 45 Thompson, and the lightning gun adds +5 to your combat skill value and deals +2 damage. There are a couple of ways to get around the 45 Thompson's exorbitant cost. Investigators with access to the Guardian card pool can play Ever Vigilant from the Path to Carcosa to save a resource, but it's highly unlikely you'll be able to pay 5 resources for the 45 Thompson and have enough resources left over to play 2 other assets as well. Investigators with access to the Rogue card pool can play Sleight of Hand to play the 45 Thompson for 1 resource, although the 45 Thompson does return to your hand at the end of your turn if it is still in play. Second, the 45 Thompson takes up both of your hand slots, which means it doesn't play nice with spare weapons, such as the machete or fire axe, or amazing items, such as flashlight, lockpicks, or magnifying glass. There are a few ways to play around this restriction. Investigators with access to the Guardian card pool can play either level of Bandolier from the Dunwich Legacy cycle. Level 0 Bandolier gives you an additional hand slot, while level 2 Bandolier gives you an extra hand slot and boosts your willpower skill value by 1 while you are armed with the 45 Thompson. However, it's worth noting that either version of Bandolier costs 2 resources, which brings the total tab for the 45 Thompson to 8. Barring emergency cash or later an Ever Vigilant, you're not getting that combo down on turn 1. If you've got your heart set on playing this combo, you'll need to include 2 copies of each card and hope they come out in quick succession, especially if you plan on playing other weapons or items. Sleight of Hand is another way to play around the 45 Thompson's hand slot restriction, although it's not quite as good as Bandolier since it doesn't actually create a hand slot. If you slide a 45 Thompson into play, you'll end up discarding any other items in your hands, which may not be ideal depending on your role in the group. The 45 Thompson does have the Firearms trait, so you can play it in combination with cards such as Eat Lead from Dim Carcosa, Custom Ammunition from Heart of the Elders, Extra Ammunition from the Core Set, and Marksmanship from Threads of Fate. The 45 Thompson also has the Illicit trait, so Finn Edwards can tutor for it using smuggled goods. You could also play it as a fast asset with Fence from Threads of Fate. Unfortunately, the Illicit trait means Preston Fairmont can't play the 45 Thompson, which is somewhat ironic considering Preston is one of the few investigators with the resources to afford it. The 45 Thompson lends itself to multiplayer rather than solo. When I play solo, I need my hand slots for items such as magnifying glass, flashlight, and lockpicks. The 45 Thompson is good, but it's not that good, not good enough to warrant crippling my ability to discover clues efficiently. Multiplayer decks tend to specialize a lot more, so if your only role in the group is to kill enemies, the 45 Thompson becomes a much more appealing option at level 0. There are plenty of pros and cons to playing the 45 Thompson. There is no question that its ammo, as well as its combat and damage bonuses, are right on target. Ultimately, your decision to play the 45 Thompson depends on whether you can afford it and whether you're comfortable dedicating your hand slots to it. As someone who plays mostly solo, that's a pretty big ask. Personally, I think the 45 Thompson will see more play in rogues and off-class rogues than guardians. Rogues don't have access to the same sort of firepower as guardians, and they're quite capable of generating the resources to pay for it outright. They also have tricks such as Sleight of Hand at their disposal if they need to cheat it into play for a turn. The 45 Thompson seems like it's too expensive for what it does to warrant a slot in most Guardian decks. Besides playing Ever Vigilant, Guardians can't reduce its cost and they can't generate resources quite as well as Rogues can. That may change later this cycle if the Guardians do receive another card to help them in the resource generation department. But that's a big if. We haven't seen a preview for one, at least. Besides, once Guardians earn a few experience, they can purchase some extremely powerful weapons that cost less and deal more damage than the 45 Thompson, which I think leaves this card on the outside looking in as the campaign progresses. The second multi-class card in the pack is Scroll of Secrets. It's a 1-cost Seeker and Mystic asset with an Intellect skill icon and the item and tome traits. It enters play with 3 secrets, and it has the action Exhaust Scroll of Secrets and spend 1 secret, look at the bottom card of any investigator's deck or the encounter deck, then either discard that card, add it to its owner's hand, place it on the bottom of its deck, or place it on top of its deck. The Scroll of Secrets takes up a hand slot. Fantasy Flight spoiled Scroll of Secrets in the preview article for the secret name, and my opinion of it hasn't changed all that much since then. There are very few cards besides Scroll of Secrets that target the bottom of the deck. The 2 of the weaknesses introduced in the Forgotten Age, Accursed Fate and the Bell Tolls, are placed on the bottom of an investigator's deck. You could use Scroll of Secrets to discard them before they can do any harm, but that's a pretty corner case scenario. You could play Scroll of Secrets in combination with Alyssa Graham to place a card at the bottom of a deck and then discard it or draw it as you see fit. The combination does have a few moving parts, but you could use it to selectively discard cards from the encounter deck or draw them from an investigator's deck. Wendy's Amulet places events at the bottom of Wendy's Adams deck. Now, Wendy can't play Scroll of Secrets herself, but another investigator could target Wendy's deck, returning an event she just played to her hand. Again, the combination has a fair number of moving parts that need to fall into place, but it could work in multiplayer. The biggest problem I have with Scroll of Secrets is that it takes an action to trigger. If I'm playing solo, I find that cards that take an action to play and an action to trigger are too labor intensive. However, Scroll of Secrets does have the TOME trait, which means Daisy Walker may take a free action to trigger it. Competition for that TOME trigger is becoming fiercer as the card pool expands, but Scroll of Secrets does allow you to manipulate Investigator decks as well as the Encounter deck. Daisy can also play Alyssa Graham, so there may be something there that's worth exploring. If you need more secrets, you can use Enraptured and Truth from Fiction to generate 1 or 2 additional secrets, respectively. Scroll of Secrets may become more interesting if we see more effects that target cards at the bottom of decks. It's certainly cheap at 1 resource, although I'm not crazy about taking an action to trigger it, which means if I play it, I will likely play it in a Daisy Walker deck. The third multi-class card in the pack is Tennessee Sour Mash. It's a 3-cost Rogue and Survivor asset with Willpower skill icon and the item and illicit traits. It uses 2 supplies and has a free triggered ability. Exhaust Tennessee Sour Mash and spend 1 supply. You get +2 willpower for a skill test on a treachery card. You may also take a fight action and discard Tennessee Sour Mash to get +3 combat skill value for an attack. Tennessee Sour Mash was also spoiled in the Secret Name preview article. I like the fact that it doesn't take up a slot, but it still seems too expensive for what it does. The free triggered ability seems to lend itself to low willpower rogue and survivor investigators such as Skids O'Toole, Jenny Barnes, Finn Edwards, Calvin Wright, Silas Marsh, and William York. However, I think many of those investigators have better options available to them if they want to raise their willpower and or protect their sanity. For example, survivors who are really concerned about preserving their sanity can play either Lucky or Cherished Keepsake. Lucky is cheaper and more versatile than Tennessee Sour Mash, since you may use it during any skill test. Cherished Keepsake, on the other hand, is considerably cheaper than Tennessee Sour Mash. The nice thing about Tennessee Sour Mash, on the other hand, is that it does come with those 2 supplies, so you can use it twice. Survivors in general, and Yorick in particular, also have access to plenty of recursion tricks, such as Resourceful and Scavenging to recycle those cards multiple times per game. Yorick could recycle Tennessee Sour Mash with his recursion tricks, but he can do the same thing with Cherished Keepsake and save a bunch of resources in the process. Tennessee Sour Mash seems like the perfect card for Finn Edwards from a thematic and mechanical perspective. Finn can play Lucky, Cherished Keepsake, or Logical Reasoning to counter his low willpower, but all of those cards count against his 5 other Seeker or Survivor cards. Tennessee Sour Mash does not, since it's a rogue card and it's illicit. Tennessee Sour Mash is illicit, which means Finn can tutor for it using smuggled goods, something he cannot do for the previously mentioned Seeker or Survivor cards. He can also play it as a fast asset with Fence. I do like the fact that you can clobber an enemy with the bottle of mash if necessary before or after you finish drinking it. The mash gives you +3 combat skill value, which is pretty significant for a weapon. However, it only hits for 1 damage, which is rather underwhelming. Who knows, maybe Wendy or Min are interested in the mash. They have combat skill values of 4 or 5 respectively with the mash, which isn't bad if they need to chip in with a point of damage here or there. Tennessee Sour Mash is probably of greater interest to rogues than survivors, who I think have cheaper and more versatile options to protect their sanity. Rogues tend to be light on willpower, so the +3 willpower bonus against treacheries gives them a fighting chance. Rogues are also quite capable of filling a combat role in multiplayer, so having a spare weapon handy isn't a bad thing to have. The next multi-class card in the pack is Enchanted Blade. It's a 3-cost Mystic and Guardian asset that has a combat skill icon and the item, relic, weapon, and melee traits. It enters play with 3 charges and takes up a hand and arcane slot. It has the game text Fight. You get +1 combat skill value for this attack. As an additional cost to initiate this ability, you may spend 1 charge to empower the blade. If you do so, you get +1 combat skill value and deal +1 damage for this attack. I can't remember where I saw it on the various forums, but one player described Enchanted Blade as a knife with charges. I think that's a pretty apt description of this card, which ticks all of the boxes required for a decent weapon. Enchanted Blade adds 1 to your base combat skill value, 2 if you spend a charge. Spending a charge also nets you +1 damage, which I think is vital on weapons these days. Besides the item, weapon, and melee traits, Enchanted Blade has the Relic trait, making it a great tool against poltergeists and wraiths, which are immune to damage from normal weapons. From a Guardian perspective, Enchanted Blade is an alternative to the machete or the 45 automatic. I still prefer the machete, but I don't think you can really go wrong with either weapon. I would certainly consider Enchanted Blade if I was playing the Path to Carcosa or the Circle Undone campaigns, just as I would place a higher priority on the 45 automatic during certain scenarios in the Dunwich Legacy campaign. Most Guardians don't care about arcane slots, so that double slot requirement isn't really an issue for them. From a Mystic perspective, Enchanted Blade is a welcome offensive option. It wasn't that long ago that Mystics had very few options to deal with enemies at level 0 besides Knife, Shriveling, or if you were really desperate, Blinding Light. The situation has improved with the release of cards such as Spirit Athame in the Path to Carcosa, Storm of Spirits in the Unspeakable Oath, and Mists of Rillier in the Forgotten Age. So Enchanted Blade doesn't feel quite like the auto-include that it might have been had it been released earlier. Akachi seems like the best bet to use the Enchanted Blade since she swings for 5 with it and gets an extra charge when it enters play. She can also add an additional charge if she pulls an Elder Sign. Unfortunately, Enchanted Blade is not a spell asset, so she can't use those charges to placate her angry spirits. Jim Culver builds that were dipping into Guardian for Machete will be happy to swap for the Enchanted Blade, since it will save them a couple of out-of-class deck slots. Diana Stanley also swings for 5 with the Enchanted Blade, which could shore up her offensive options while her willpower ramps up. Most other Mystics and off-class Mystics are only swinging for 3 or 4 with the Enchanted Blade, so they may prefer to stick with their spells. Speaking of spells, Enchanted Blade's double slot requirement is a much bigger issue for Mystics than Guardians. Mystics have a lot of cards vying for their 2 arcane slots, so Enchanted Blade may be a tough sell, especially if they're not getting that much out of it. Mystics and off-class Mystics also have a few cards that require a hand slot, including Flashlight, Grotesque Statue, Spirit Athame, and the Chthonian Stone, so competition for those slots is fierce. There are a handful of other investigators who may also take a liking to the Enchanted Blade. Lola Hayes likes the multi-class cards in general, since they do count towards both classes for her deck building restrictions. That gives her a little more room to maneuver in the deck building department. Daisy Walker and Ursula Downs builds may also want to consider Enchanted Blade, given their very limited offensive capabilities at level 0. Ursula Downs really doesn't get all that much out of the blade. She's only got 3 combat with it, but that ability to deal an extra damage can be gold if you need to take out an enemy here or there. Enchanted Blade is a very cool addition to the game that may find a home in a wide variety of investigators. Guardians will be happy to have a relic that they can that can be used to deal with poltergeists and wraiths, while Mystics will be happy to have another offensive option at level 0 to take some of the pressure off those precious shriveling charges. I would also consider swapping Knife for Enchanted Blade in pretty much any build that can take it without running afoul of their deck building restrictions. Enchanted Blade is more expensive than Knife, but I would much rather have 3 uses out of it than just the 1. The final multi-class card in the pack is Grisly Totem. It's a 3-cost Survivor and Seeker asset with an Agility skill icon and the item and charm traits. It has the response, after you commit a card to a skill test, exhaust Grisly Totem. That card gains another instance of one of its skill icons of your choice. The Grisly Totem takes up an accessory slot. Grisly Totem was also spoiled in FFG's preview article months ago, and it's a tricky card to judge. The response is similar to that of Minte Fan, although the ability is much more limited in scope since it only works on cards you commit to the skill test, and it duplicates a skill icon on the card instead of adding a wild skill icon. Unlike Min, you may add the skill icon only once per round. The assumption here is that you're committing at least 1 card to a skill test each round. If you're not committing cards to skill tests, say because you're burning resources to boost them instead, then the resources you invested in Grisly Totem are going to waste. Much like the talents in the core set, Grisly Totem's value is subject to diminishing returns, a concept that I've discussed on this channel before. In the context of the Arkham Horror LCG, diminishing returns refers to how much bang you get for each skill icon that you commit to a skill test. Generally speaking, if you're playing on easy or standard difficulty and your skill value is too greater than the skill test difficulty, each skill icon you commit to the skill test above that threshold is subject to diminishing returns. If you want to get the most out of Grisly Totem, you need to be aware of that and commit skill icons appropriately. Let's take a look at a couple of examples. Let's assume Joe Diamond is playing The Gathering. Joe Diamond's willpower and agility are 2, which is slightly below average, while his intellect and combat are 4, which is slightly above average. If Joe takes an investigate action at the study, which is a 2-shroud location, then there isn't much point to him committing a card to the skill test, since his skill value is already 2 greater than the skill test difficulty. Since Joe is unlikely to commit a card to the skill test in this case, Grisly Totem won't do him much good either. Now let's assume that Joe is taking an investigate action at the cellar, which is a 4-shroud location. If Joe commits a copy of Perception to the skill test, he won't get much bang for his buck if he triggers Grisly Totem, since his skill value is already 2 greater than the skill test difficulty with Perception. However, if Joe commits a different card to this test, say a spare copy of Barricade, then Grisly Totem will do some work, improving his odds of success by almost 20%. Now let's assume that it's the Mythos phase. Joe draws a Rotting Remains from the encounter deck. This is the type of situation where Grisly Totem shines. If Joe commits a card with a single willpower icon to the skill test, say Dynamite Blast, Grisly Totem will add another icon, improving Joe's odds of surviving significantly. If Joe commits a copy of Guts to the skill test instead, Grisly Totem will add a 3rd willpower skill icon to the card, which is still extremely helpful. On the other hand, if Joe commits a copy of Steadfast, Grisly Totem's value plummets significantly, since that extra willpower icon will be going to waste. As you can see, Grisly Totem's value depends on several factors, including the difficulty level of the campaign, your investigator's base skill values, the investigator's role in the group if you're playing multiplayer, and the number of skill icons on the card you commit to the skill test. For investigators such as Joe Diamond, Grisly Totem will likely be more valuable during willpower and agility skill tests than intellect and combat skill tests. Willpower and agility skill tests are common on treachery cards, so Grisly Totem may be a valuable addition to his deck, regardless of his role, as long as he has the cards to commit to those skill tests. However, if you're playing an investigator who is planning to use talents to do the heavy lifting during skill tests, say such as higher education, Grisly Totem is probably not the card for you. I could see playing Grisly Totem in Mintay Fan or Silas Marsh, both of whom rely heavily on committing cards to skill tests. Calvin Wright may like it as well, although Grisly Totem does compete with Rabbit's Foot for the accessory slot. Calvin needs all the help he can get to pass skill tests until he takes some damage and horror, but I feel as though I'd rather have a card draw for failing the skill test rather than commit a card and add a skill icon to it, which likely won't be enough anyway if his base skill values are still at 0. Grisly Totem is the type of card that you've got to judge on an investigator by investigator basis. If you plan on making a lot of skill tests during your weaker skills and you've got the cards to commit to those skill tests, then Grisly Totem is certainly worth a look. 3 resources is quite a bit to spend on an asset, but the totem can certainly tip the odds in your favor in the right situation. If you're not concerned about shoring up your weakest skill, or you plan on spending resources to boost those skill tests, then Grisly Totem won't be of much use to you. That's going to do it for my review of the gold multi-class cards in the Secret Name. When FFG spoiled the multi-class cards months ago, I thought many of them were weak and overpriced, which wasn't that surprising considering designer Matt Newman is exploring some new design space with these cards. Now that I've had a chance to see them all, I think they're all right, albeit some of them are still overpriced. Enchanted Blade is probably my favorite of the bunch. The price is certainly right, and it does fill holes in the Guardian and Mystic card pools. I'm certainly looking forward to seeing whether we'll have more multi-class cards down the road that push the envelope a little more. I know we will be receiving upgrades for at least some of the multi-class cards, perhaps all of them in future Mythos packs. So it will be interesting to see how those cards improve on the cards that we see in the secret name. That's going to do it for this review. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromleng@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromleng. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.